so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life? Well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the reflection and extension of you who will be here each Wednesday interviewing a different consciousness changemaker. And on the other 4 weekdays, leading the way to ensure that your perspective is consistently expanded, your vibration is constantly elevated, and your heart is overflowing and full. Also, before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to take about a minute and a half to tell you about a few sponsors that not only help to make it possible to produce this show 5 days a week, but that I'm also genuinely passionate about promoting. The first longtime stellar supporter of the show that I want to mention is Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online with over 8,000 video titles. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. The second sponsor I'm sincerely passionate about promoting is Purium. It's no mystery that bringing your mind, body, and spirit into balance is necessary if a person truly intends to manifest the greatest and grandest version of themselves. So if you've been looking for a way to easily get organic superfoods into your system every day with a simple plan that can help you reestablish a healthier foundation and relationship with food, like I was doing before I found Purium, I highly recommend going to positivehead.com/transformation and checking out the videos and interviews there where I dive deeply into discussions explaining why I take these products every day. And should you ultimately end up on iShopPurium.com to purchase any of their 50 plus amazing superfood products, be sure to use the code POSITIVEHEAD, all one word, for a 25% discount. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share, I'm very excited to have Richard Haight here with me on the show. Richard is a best-selling author of several books, including The Unbound Soul, as well as an instructor of martial meditation and healing arts. Super excited to have you here, Richard. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for bringing me on.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. And let's just dive right in, shall we? I like to start with the same predictable question as my listeners know, and also my outro question, kind of the same thing. So my intro question is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
I have how long to answer? 10 floors to answer? Is that what you said?
10 floors.
10
You can make it as fast or as slow of an elevator as you like.
What's my passion? To know myself. That is it.
All right.
That is it.
All right. Well, we've got some floors left over, and the woman can just sit there and contemplate what that might mean. And we're going to dive in to figure out dive in here to try and get to know you a little better, Richard. And I think a good place to do that is to start with your backstory. I always like to hear, kind of how did you end up doing what it is that you do?
Oh,
what led you to this point?
That's going to take us down a rabbit hole. I hope that's all right with you.
We prefer rabbit holes around here. Thank you.
All right. When I was about 8 years old, I had profound experience, actually, a mystical experience that started off a path of exploration into what is the nature of life, of me, of ultimately what had occurred
Reality.
is of reality itself. I
always like to call it. I was going to say I always like to call it the ultimate nature of reality. Is my way of referencing it.
Yeah. So, when you get far enough into this process of exploration, it gets really wonky, and then you can't pin reality on anything.
Right.
And so then the word reality no longer has a real to it anymore. So the word starts to not apply quite so much.
Right.
So that's where the difficulty comes. A lot of these questions, if I answer them on a surface level, I can come up with a word like reality. But if I answer very honestly, then it's very difficult to answer. So pardon me for that.
Sure.
But when I was 8, me and the neighborhood kids were out playing, war up in the hills behind our house. I grew up in Southern California in a rural town. We'd spend a lot of time doing that in the summer breaks and things. And
gotcha.
And an older neighborhood kid came by when we were kind of wrapping up for the evening and told us there was a Bible study class that his mother was having later that week, and we needed to attend. And I did at the time. Of course, I didn't even know what the Bible was. I was just like 8 years old. But when he clarified that we would burn in hell for not attending, we decided that it would be best if we joined.
Nice motivation.
Yes.
Little fire and brimstone always lights a fire under you.
yes. And so we joined up, and it was a Wednesday night Bible study class, and everybody in the neighborhood went because this was the oldest kid in the neighborhood, and everybody feared and respected him, and so kind of what he said was law. And we got our permission from our parents. I guess they didn't really think it could be a bad thing. So why would my 8-year-old son want to go to Bible study is probably the question in their mind.
Right.
But we joined and went every Wednesday night. And I grew up with a learning disorder. So she handed out Bibles and our homework was to read. And I couldn't read. But I tried. I just like the stories of Jesus. Something about Jesus was very compelling for me. And at that time, they only read the New Testament, the 4 canonical Gospels about him specifically. And so I thought, this is as Wayne's World says, this is a righteous dude,
I heard they're remaking that, actually.
Is that right?
Or actually, maybe it's not Wayne's World. Hold on. Maybe it's Bill and Ted's, actually, now that I think about it.
Bill and Ted's. You're right. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Yes. And so it was a compelling story. Very powerful. And I really love that character. So I was trying to read the Bible, something I would never do in school. I would never do the homework. I would never do any reading. It was something I disdained. Right. And then like 3 months into it or so, the Bible study teacher gathered us all in the main room and informed us that we were shepherds of the Lord, and our responsibility was find the lost sheep and bring them to the Lord, and that if we didn't, those individuals would burn in hell. And quite specifically, they needed to be this particular sect of Christianity, because any other form of Christianity
it sounds an awful lot like my dad. Is it Church of Christ by chance?
No, it was actually Born Again Christians.
Oh, okay.
Born Again Christians.
Another only path. Got it.
Yes, and I don't know if that's how they normally teach, but this is how this woman portrayed it.
Right.
And I suspect it was because my grandparents were also born again, and when they came down to visit, they said pretty much the same thing. So,
sure.
So of course, I'm this 8-year-old boy. I don't want my parents to burn in hell for eternity. I mean, what a terribly malicious thing to do. But so I decided I would do my best to convert them. So I went back to my house that evening for dinner and asked them if they would be willing to talk to me about religion and Christianity. And they were quite surprised that their 8-year-old boy is asking them to have a serious conversation about God. And so they agreed. They said, if you're going to have this conversation, it'll have to be done as adults. So, during that time, you're going to have to behave as an adult. Are you willing to do that? And boy, that was a prideful moment. Yes, absolutely. I want to talk to you as an adult, be treated like an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So after dinner, we got out our Bibles, and basically my father, who was much more well-versed in the Bible, had this conversation with me. And as I explained why I brought this up, that, I'm afraid you're going to burn in hell and you need to be born again Christian, or, that will be the case. And I love you and I don't want that to happen. He started to question the ideology. Would you love and respect a God who would send someone to hell for simply not being a born again Christian?
Right.
And that question just kind of cut right through it. To be honest, I wouldn't even like that God.
Right.
I wouldn't like that God. I wouldn't like anybody who would make such an ultimatum. I mean, we're basically silly humans. And, if you go anywhere on the planet, everybody has their own belief systems. And surprise, surprise, a lot of them have been told the same thing.
Exactly.
And so, what is this? We're all going to burn in hell just because we weren't born into the right family in the right place with the right knowledge.
Right.
And that's basically how I explained it. And I was an 8-year-old boy, but I wasn't entirely stupid. That made sense to me.
Sure.
And but what he said is, do you really want to know the truth of God? And if I was being honest, that was definite yes. And he says, well, then you'll have to be very honest and persistent and dedicate your life to that if that's what you really want to know. Keep an open mind. And so I agreed to that. Yeah, it was one of his highlight moments. It was a highlight reel moment for his life, because that's not normally he's not normally an open-minded, understanding person.
Interesting.
He's actually normally a kind of tyrant, I would say.
Interesting.
So this was a very strange moment. And in fact, this is the only moment in my entire life with him where this kind of enlightened communication occurred.
Interesting. It would happen around this too.
I'm not really sure it was him talking, to be honest. At this point,
that's exactly what I was just thinking. That's exactly what I was just thinking as you were saying that. I'm like, he was definitely being moved. Character.
So that was a kind of, in my opinion, a small miracle, because it was just so far out of his character, his personality, his life pattern. I mean, it's just astounding. But after that, for a period of 6 months or so, it's a rough guess at this time, I started to have a repeating dream. And it wasn't just it's not black and white kind of dream, a fleeting, sort of shallow meaning thing. But this dream was rich with meaning, full color, all senses, realer than real. Wow. And what would happen is I would wake up in the dream, and the room would have this kind of warm glowing light in it. Not the light of the light bulb, but a kind of a spiritual light, for lack of a better terminology. Sure. And in the middle of my bedroom floor, there was a man lying there.
Oh, wow.
And now that's a pretty odd thing. And normally you'd be quite terrified to find a stranger in your room when you wake up, but there was no fear. In fact, this light that emanated from that in the room, it was a very loving, warm, inviting light. And I felt drawn to approach him, no fear whatsoever.
Right. And
so when I approached him and I looked down into his eyes, I don't know how I knew it, but it was Jesus Christ.
Wow.
So I'm looking at this, Jesus Christ lying on the floor. And I look into his eyes and I can see this incredible compassion and love, but there's also a kind of deep sorrow. And so I ask him, what he wants. And he says to me, find my bones. Oh, sorry. At that time he said, help me. Pardon me. First time was help me. And then, so I just, 8-year-old boy, silly, goofy kid, I thought he wanted help to be stood up. So I grabbed onto his wrist. And tried to pick him up, and his arm squished in my hand like a water balloon. Wow. And I realized he didn't have any bones. Oh, and wow. Then I looked back into his eyes, and he said, help me, and I would wake up. And so this dream would just happen again and again. Wow. Once a week, every couple of weeks, I don't know, just at random times for a period of months. Just keep returning in the exact same sequence, everything exactly the same. And I would wake
Wow.
up from the dream in tears because I really wanted to help him and I didn't know how. I didn't know what he
Right.
wanted, and he looked like he was in pain. And this was Jesus Christ, the one I respected very, very much.
Sure.
And so I would spend my days in school, just thinking about this dream and what he could possibly want. And I really wasn't paying much attention to anything else during that time. I didn't tell anybody about these dreams because it was strange. I didn't think anybody would understand. Even I didn't understand. And then one night, it changed. At that last moment when he said, "Help me," the second time, for lack of a better description, a kind of energy surged through my body, and it anchored me in that dream. And so that I could ask the next question. I wasn't kicked out, as would usually occur. And the question was,
Gotcha.
how can I help you?
Sure.
And he says, find my bones.
Mm.
For my bones are the core or essence of my teachings. What I taught has been so corrupted by the ignorance and greed of humanity that the essence of my lessons, the essence of my teachings has been lost to the world.
Wow.
Find my bones and bring it back to the world. Will you do this? And
Wow.
I'm just 8 years old. And
Yeah, that's a big ask for an 8-year-old, right?
That's a big. Now that's not the thought that went through my mind at that time. It was like at that time something in my heart, like the book of my heart, opened up, for lack of a better description, and the answer there was yes. This is what my purpose is.
Wow.
It wasn't an intellectual answer at all. It just felt like totally right in every cell of my body, even though I didn't know really what I was being asked. Not really. You don't know the implications of that.
Sure.
Nor what would be required. And so that's
right.
So I said, yes, I will. And I was out of the dream, and that was the last dream I had of Jesus and the beginning of a lifelong quest. That's how it started.
Wow. That's quite the start. So did you, now you're pretty young. 8's pretty young. I mean, so did this become, sort of, anchored into your life, mission from that point forward? Or is it something that you, okay, wow.
Yes. And that became and surprisingly, counterintuitively, that became extremely traumatic.
Really?
Because I had no idea where to begin. I mean, it's just like you've got this mission. You're out in the middle of the ocean, and you've got to find the Americas, so to speak. But you don't even have a map. You don't have a sextus or whatever you call that. You don't have anything. You don't even know how to navigate by the stars. You've never been on a ship before, and you're alone on this ship. That was the feeling.
A little bit intimidating.
It was intimidating, and the strange thing is I knew that on a very deep level, I knew that I couldn't get this information. Nobody would be able to teach me this. Sure. That it wasn't found in the Bible in a way that would be clear enough to understand. Right. Now, in the dream, he said that his teachings have been so confused. It doesn't mean it's not there, but it's maybe distorted.
Misinterpreted.
My take on it, yes.
Yeah.
And so then, I don't know, maybe a month or two later, my grandparents came to visit, and they're born-again Christians, and they asked me if I would go to church with them. And so I was eager for that because I was really quite eager for somebody to give me the answers, even though part of me was like, that's not going to happen. Somewhere rather deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen, but I was still, I'm a kid. You want people to give you the answer. Yep. And so I went to church, and it was just more hellfire and brimstone and how you'll burn in hell. And it was all about the sin and corruption of humanity. And, there was just no there was no love or clarity there. Right. And as a kid, I couldn't have articulated that point. It was just, this isn't right. I mean, it just like, I shouldn't be here. Wow. This is not the place for me. Wow. And so that was the last time I went to church with them. And then basically I just didn't know what to do with this teachings. And, like I said, I couldn't read. And besides that, reading any books never felt, for this topic, I just never felt right about it. Even to this day, I don't read books on this topic. On spirituality or anything like it's an exploration. It's an exploration. Gotcha. And I'm not looking to regurgitate what someone else has said because that would not be keeping my promise, right?
Sure.
Sure. So in that sense, it's not that I'm not open to information. It's just that I always store it in the explore before coming to a conclusion category.
Yeah.
But by the time I was 16, I was so caught up. The strange thing is you know that inner critic phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
So the inner critic is a powerful, let's say, psychological entity at least. And it becomes most powerful when you have an aim that you cannot achieve or that you believe you cannot achieve, right? And so I have this visceral aim, every cell in my body aiming towards this, and I have no idea where to begin. And by the time I'm 16, that inner critic is just, you're a useless waste of flesh. You cannot keep your promise. And I actually got to a point where I was suicidal. I mean, I was just, you're so caught up in your head that you can't be in the moment, and therefore you can't do anything right. You're constantly second guessing yourself. So I couldn't socialize with people. I wasn't good in school. I wasn't good at sports. I was just, totally caught up in my head, which is in a lot of ways the opposite direction of where you really want to be going.
Sure.
But, I didn't know that. I was only 16 years old, and when you're in this space for a long enough period of time, the body just learns through association, much like a dog learns anything through association, that it's learning its nature of the self. And its nature of the self becomes the inner critic. It becomes the anxiety. It becomes the ineptitude, right? And so you're self-identified as all of that phenomenon, even though it's fundamentally not true. In your mind, that is the truth of it. And so I was suicidal, and then one day I was in martial arts school. I was testing for the martial arts, and at the end of the test, the teacher had separated us all up, put us in the back room, and took one person at a time to run through the next exercise. And what would happen is we'd hear this electric shock, and then somebody scream, and kind of figured out that he's tasing these people. And so this is brown belt. So testing for brown belts, just ranked just before black belt.
Yep.
And so I'm going to go out and be tased. And I decided, I've determined that I'm not going to respond to this threat. I'm just going to be out there and totally calm and act as if I'm okay with it and be okay with it. And so when it was my turn to be called out, I wasn't going to let fear, run the show. So I stood there, and he showed me the taser, and he, zapped it a few times. I don't know if you've ever seen one. They're quite intense.
Yeah. And
then brought it up to my arm and says, "Okay, I'm going to tase you now." And I just kept staring off into the distance, and he didn't tase me. And that was my surprise. And I don't think he tased anybody in retrospect. I think that was all an act for us to experience the fear of it.
Right. Interesting.
But I didn't play into his game.
Right.
And so he, instead of saying, "Hey, great job, you did well with the fear," or whatever, he decided to up the ante. And he went back into his office, and he brought out a pistol.
Oh, wow.
A revolver.
Oh, he's not messing around.
And he's not messing around. And so he says, "I want you to grab the revolver, put it to your head, and pull the trigger."
Whoa.
Yeah. And and the thing that most shocked me, that was surprise. The thing that most shocked me is that I did it.
Oh, wow.
That I did it. And so I'm trying to pull the trigger, but what I thought the trigger is, it's not moving. Nothing's happening. So I quickly pull the gun down, and I take the safety off, and I put it back to my head. And then now he grabs it from my hands and says, "Hey, this was just a test, and you should never blindly follow what someone tells you. You have to be the author of your life. I mean, even if someone you really respect tells you something, you should never just listen to them blindly. And you could have killed yourself. And that's the most important lesson here, is you should never try to kill yourself."
Right.
And so this, those great important lessons and everything, but something was exposed there. Within myself, I realized I was suicidal. I realized in the moment when I grabbed the gun, there was a sense of relief.
Right.
That I actually wanted to die. And what's worse is I realized that, at least I thought, everybody else saw that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just humiliated. I was just utterly humiliated. I broke down in tears, and I passed the test, but that wasn't exactly good news for me. It didn't mean anything at that point. That didn't mean anything to me. And I spent the next couple of months with this kind of brooding within me until one day I just admitted, yes, I'm suicidal, and I don't want to be in this world anymore. I don't want to be myself anymore. I don't want to act. I don't want to, this is, my entire life was false at that point. I was hanging out with people that were drinking, doing drugs, and I just wanted to be around somebody. I didn't have any friends that, that I could hang out with that were aimed in a good direction. And I was just desperate for company, and I was lying and living a false life, pretending to be someone that I was not. And I despised myself. And so I decided that this was the day. And I remember it was a summer afternoon. I'm in the back bedroom, maybe 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. You can see the kind of the horizontal southern rays of the sun coming through that back window. And I remember sitting on the floor. I had the weapon ready. I had written my note to my parents, which that's a strange experience, writing a suicide note, because as you're writing it, you have the realization that no matter what you say, it's not going to go well for them.
Yeah.
There's just nothing you can say. So I just wrote, I know you love me, but I don't love myself. I can't be in this world any longer. I'm sorry. And then that was it. Then I sat down on the floor and looking out the window. And then I have this realization that this is my last moment.
Wow.
And the strange thing about that was that the realization that this was my last moment came the realization that I no longer have a future or a past. I no longer have anything to worry about. I can no longer make a mistake. I don't even care about what I think of me anymore. Like all of this concern just washed away. And I found myself in this very deep moment of silence. And when I say moment, it was a timeless space. It could have been 10 minutes for all I know, or a half hour, or quite literally a second. I don't know what that was, right? I mean, there's no words for it. There's no definition to it. It was just this depth, as I could describe it, of clarity.
Wow.
Yeah. And then out of that depth, suddenly, at some point, my eyes were drawn up to look at the rays of light coming through the window. And as I see these rays of light coming through the window, I noticed I've maybe noticed this phenomenon before, but there's this floating dust particles that intersect with with the rays of light.
Sure.
And the light hits them and they sparkle. And it looked to me in that time, I was having essentially a psychedelic experience in a way, or a mystical experience. Yeah. They looked like little angels of light.
Wow.
Brilliant, beautiful. And I was amazed that I had gone through my entire life and never noticed this incredibly beautiful divine phenomenon before. I just missed it. And it's staring me right in the face every day.
Yeah.
And then the surge of energy came through my body, just like the surge of energy I described in that childhood dream that I had. The same kind of energy surged through my body. And then the next thing happened, which was just, to this day, I still don't understand it. A voice spoke through my chest as if my chest were a speaker. I mean, it wasn't out of my mouth.
Wow.
And I don't know if anybody else could have heard it if they were in the room, but I heard it as if it was an external voice.
Wow.
And it completed one of the last thought I had, which was, now it's time to end this, before I went into the silence. And it kind of continued the sentence, or you could change your life. You could stop hanging out with people who don't care about you, who are only using you for the company of smoking pot and drinking alcohol. You could find new friends who are working towards a positive purpose, who have a dream and a passion which they've dedicated themselves to. You could graduate high school early, go to college early, and study what you want to do. Be yourself. Do what you want to do and be yourself.
Wow.
And the strange thing about that is that I believed it. Because if another human being had told me that, I would never have believed him.
Right.
But for some reason, there was just, it was just clarity. I believed it fully that this was possible, and I was going to do it. And so I didn't kill myself that day. It was an intervention that later on haunted me because I thought, why me? Why did I get this intervention? And
Right.
millions of other people did not.
Right.
That's not fair. That's not right. And so I made a decision at that time as I'm going to spend my life to be that intervention for others as best as possible.
Wow.
And ultimately, the best intervention is to bring out that voice within each person.
Absolutely.
I don't know what that voice was. Maybe that was Jesus. Maybe who knows what that was? That doesn't really matter, but
sure.
But the depth of it was there. And
How old were you?
My life changed. I was 16 at that time.
16. Wow. What a important moment. What a crossroads to experience. It's like you sort of had an ego death to a certain degree, it sounds like. Now, did you come out of that? And then, did you have dramatic change in your circumstances afterwards? Change your friends and
Yes. Oh, yes. I would say that it was as if 50% of the weight was taken off of me. I still had the other 50% that I needed to work through. But 50% is a lot of weight. I basically went from being in this place of utter despair, utter hopelessness, to a place of a kind of clarity, a realization that, in fact, I can do this, and I'm going to. There is no other choice, and I'm going to do this. And I realized very, very viscerally that I could not spend another moment around those people.
Yeah.
Because if I went back to those friends, even for 10 minutes, I knew I was in a weak enough place that they would drag me back in. And that was a life and death situation for me.
Wow.
And it was more than it wasn't just that I wanted to live. I wanted to live in a way that was powerful, that was inspiring to myself by my own definitions, not by anybody else's. Right. And it's not that there wasn't doubt. There was. It's just that it no longer affected my decisions.
Right.
I would decide and follow through, even if there was fear and doubt. And that's still true of today. Even if there's fear or doubt, you just do it. And that's the transformative power. And that's where people get most stuck, is that they believe the voice of fear and doubt. And that was very, very helpful. So the next time those friends came over, I called them all and said, hey, don't come over to my house. Don't call me. If you do, I will kick your ass. And I was at this point, I was pretty good at the martial arts, and they believed it. One day they came over, and I ran out the house, ran down the stairs, and sprinted straight towards them. They just got back in the car and drove off, and that was the last I ever saw of them.
Wow.
And that I was going to follow through, and it was life or death for me. And I told them as much. I said, hey, if I don't want to see you again. If I do, it's going to turn out really bad for me, and that's not good. So to protect myself, I'm gonna put it on you. I will kick your ass. And so that's what happened there. And then I decided that I was too messed up to be around people. I needed to spend time to myself. And I spent about 6 months just working, studying for, there's a test in California where I grew up called the California High School Proficiency Examination. I decided I was going to graduate early, and you could take this test to graduate early. It's not the same thing as a GED. It's something you take while you're in school, not after you've failed out.
Gotcha.
And so I spent that time studying and just to myself and working. And that time alone was very well spent. And I highly recommend people, if they're lost like I was in any way, they need to refine that inner compass. And a lot of times it's just learning to be with yourself and find the dignity within.
Sure. Right.
That's how it started.
That's quite the journey you've been on. And so now you're several books later, and, teaching martial arts, meditation, healing arts. And so I'd love to hear some of that. Maybe we can give a little you can give us a little insight into the books, like the Unbound Soul, perhaps, would be great.
So the Unbound Soul is essentially the result. It's a memoir / spiritual awakening guide, and it is born of my experiences and explorations in Japan. And when I was about 24, I moved to Japan to study the martial arts. I wanted to be strangely, how is this possible? I wanted to be a mixed martial artist. I don't know if you were ever familiar with the UFC or MMA or any of that sort of thing. But back in the day when it first started, there was a guy that was the champion. It was a guy named Hoist Gracie of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu fame. Yes. Oh, did you ever watch those shows?
Yeah,
so I was watching. I was training because I wanted to beat Hoist Gracie. So I was studying wrestling. I was studying jiu-jitsu. I was studying, stand-up fighting and all this kind. I've been doing it for years, and I was getting pretty good. And I thought, well, I'm gonna beat Hoist Gracie. But about the time that I when I was younger, I got run over by a horse.
Oh, wow.
And it did a lot of neck and spinal damage. And so it takes a lot of training to get yourself into condition for that sort of tournament. Because at that time it was a tournament, and you might fight 3 times in one night. If you're going to get to be go all the way, you have to fight 3 times in one night. Nowadays they fight maybe once every 3 or 4 months or twice a year. But 3 times in a night. So, you've got to have, your conditioning has got to be par excellence. And so I was training day in and day out. I was working on construction as a fireman, which means I'm carrying around a fire hose, spraying the soil for the heavy equipment. And it's a great way for me. And my rule was to run everywhere I went, not like the other workers who just walk from place to place to spray. I would carry that heavy hose and run everywhere. It got me in good shape, got me a lot of raises. But the problem was my back would go out. After so much intensity, it just couldn't handle it. Would go out. So then I'd spend a couple of weeks just waiting for the inflammation to settle before I could start training again. At least a couple of weeks.
Sure.
And so at some point it dawned on me, this isn't going to happen. I need to find another training path. And then that ultimately led me to Japan, where there was a martial arts that's actually very unknown, very rare martial art. It was not taught publicly, called Daito-ryu Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. And I had seen a video of the instructor, and he's just effortlessly tossing people around and defeating people. And I thought it looked fake. I mean, to be honest, it looked fake.
Sure.
And as much of hard training as I had done, and competition training, and brass tacks training that I had done, you start to get pretty skeptical about things that defeat your strength that effortlessly.
Sure.
But when I heard him speak about it, there was just no deceit in his voice. It was just felt very, very honest. This feeling in me, that's where I need to go. I mean, I just need to go to Japan and meet this man. And so part of me still didn't believe it, but I was going to go and test him out.
Go find out, right?
That was my determination. So I don't know, maybe 6 months later, I got my plane ticket, flew to Japan, and met him. He welcomed me, surprisingly. And that night during the training, I'm sitting at the sidelines. There was a camera crew at the sidelines as well. They were for a martial arts magazine called Haight, which is the most famous martial arts magazine in Japan. And they were there as journalists to record and interview him and talk about his art. And so at the end of the training, I'm basically there with my translator and this crew of journalists. And I'm basically really in a very skeptical space, because he's tossing people around with a single finger. He was like, grab my finger like the old man fart joke, and tossing people and just effortlessly. He's 72, and they're, most of the students are in their 30s, and they're strong and young men.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. And I'm not I wasn't trying to be rude, but it's hard to believe.
Sure.
And so once the class was over, the instructor came over to the camera crew, and the lead interviewer said, to be honest, I'm a 6th-degree black belt of judo. I don't know if you know anything about judo, but you don't get your ranks based on time. It's all through competition. To get to be a
Gotcha.
6th-degree black belt, you have gone
He's
through a
kicked some
lot of
butts.
hard comp. You've kicked some butt. You're good.
Yeah.
There's there's not that many people
Well,
that get that high.
I'm a 7, so yeah, I understand now.
Yeah. And so I knew what it meant to be a 6th-degree black belt in judo, and I'm like, okay, this guy's, he's no bullshit. He knows what he's talking about. At least he's tested himself out very thoroughly.
Sure.
And so he's saying, no disrespect intended, but I've watched your whole class, and I honestly can't understand why people are falling down.
Yeah, right. It defies the laws of physics.
Yes. And so he says, I'm going to write this article about you, and Haight is a prestigious magazine, and I don't want to write something that is about an art that's not authentic. I would like to test it out. Will you allow me to test this? And so the instructor said, sure. Come on out. Call him onto the mat. And the instructor says, grab me in an arresting fashion, really get me down, And so the judo man grabs onto his arm and, this is like, the judo man's maybe 35, 40.
Sure.
Very, very stout, strong, good condition. And this old man is like 72 years old. So he just kind of, bends over at the way. It's like, there's nothing you can do to stop this guy from crumpling him into the ground. So it seems. And then, so the old man looks back at him and says, "Are you ready?" And he says, "Sure." And then, just effortless, as if he just as effortlessly as standing up, he just stood up and relaxed his arm, and the judo guy fell down flat on his back. I mean, just like melted. So it was weird.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so the judo man gets back up and says, "I don't know what happened there. I think I just kind of, for some reason, lost my balance, or tripped or something. I don't know if I had a brain fart, but can I try it again?" And the old man says, "Yeah, this. Sure. He says, "But this time we'll count to 3, just so you can be sure. And on the counter of 3, as soon as I hit 3, I'll start the technique, and I'll do the very same technique so you can be totally prepared for it. And I want you to fix your stance and get totally ready. You've experienced it once, and now you've got an advantage."
Right.
And so the guy agrees to that, and they take the same position. The guy's really got his stance fixed. He's locked into position. 1, 2, 3. The guy falls down again.
Oh, wow.
At this time, because he's had such a stiff stance, such a strong stance, he really hit the ground hard. His head banged the ground, so he actually was down for a little while, and he got up and shook his head and got kind of dizzy, a little bit staggering around. And turns out 6 months later, the magazine comes out. We get the article. I joined that night, by the way. I tested him too. He did the same technique to me. I melted like butter. And then he holds out his finger, and like the old man fart joke, and tells me to grab onto his finger. I latch on, and as soon as I do, if I get flipped feet over heads, land on the ground. By the time I get up, he's walking off just to his changing room as if nothing had happened. Yes, exactly.
What?
And that was the thought in my mind at that time. What? That was it. There's nothing else. And the strange thing is, you're kind of wondering, did I do that to myself? It was that smooth. You don't know how it happened. You don't feel anything.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so I joined that night. 6 months later, his article comes out, and in the article, he basically said, "What? I don't know how this happened, but it was so effective that when I hit the ground, I've studied judo my entire life, and I'm, by all measures, a master of taking falls.
Yeah.
I couldn't anticipate the fall, so when I fell, I hit my head on the ground, and I got a concussion. I ended up, after that, having to go to the hospital."
Whoa.
And so that was, I still have that magazine here to this day. But it was a strange experience. And so I'm doing the martial arts, and I'm wondering, what does this have to do with this vision of Jesus Christ and the promise I made to Jesus? It clearly felt right that I needed to be there, but I couldn't quite put 2 and 2 together. And now what I understand
You're seeing some Jesus type walk on water stuff with this guy anyway, right?
I don't know if I want to say that exactly, but it's something beyond what my mind could understand in any case.
It's defying the laws of physics.
Defying the laws. Well, I'm not even sure. I think it doesn't defy the law of physics. I think it defies the way in which the mind anticipates resistance. So it's so smooth, so harmonious. The way the mind works is, the mind doesn't detect harmony, it detects disharmony. So when you look at anything, your eyes notice the corners, the edges, the sharp places, the noisy things. That's what stands out. So the mind is really a disharmony detection system. But if you can move or be in such a way that is harmonious, there are no edges, there are no rough places, there is no noise, it is effectively invisible to the nervous system and the mind. And that's what was happening there. And so he could just move right through your strength because you can't feel it. You can't stop what you can't feel.
Interesting.
And so that's what occurred at that time. And I didn't really understand this until years later when I, got to a point where I was sufficiently proficient at it.
Wow.
But then
you studied under him.
I studied under him, and then I studied under him for about 5 or 6 years, and then I ended up moving to another instructor of the same art, who also taught the sword, short staff, and a number of other. These are old samurai arts. These are very secretive, and they're not normally publicly taught. And so I was very fortunate to be allowed into these lineages and taught to the completion of the arts. I inherited the entirety of the arts, and so that was a real blessing. And now I can look back and understand.
Are people able to study this now? I think of my nephew is really into, he's just started in the last year or so taking martial arts and working with the staff. So I got to make sure he hears this episode because I know the first thing he's going to be like, where do I learn this?
In Japan, yes. In America, there are very few true dojos of any of this. There's a number of dojos that claim to be, but they're not really there.
Gotcha.
I've actually closed down my dojo here. I teach in Oregon, or I used to teach in Oregon. I needed to write these books. And so I just dedicated, I've got about 10 books that are writing simultaneously. Once that's done, I'll maybe reopen the dojo and teach. Right now I only teach privately, but at some point I just need to get this done. That's the next step in the process, is to get the information out in a way that helps people to move forward, help their lives to become ever more harmonious, to see that noise that their sense of self has created, that their perception and paradigm has created in their lives. Maybe they're not going to get to a point where they can toss somebody with their finger. That's not really the point of it. The point of it is to embody harmony throughout your daily life to the extent that is possible for each individual.
Gotcha.
Right? And that requires awareness. A book can only pass on so much, but a lot of the content of the self, what we believe to be us, is what causes our disharmony. The story of you. And so when I pointed out in such a clear, for anybody who's being honest, it'll be clear and undeniable what's going on in your own psyche that is causing your misery and suffering. And so that's really what the books are about right now. And what I realize is the difference between what I'm teaching, and it is different in a lot of ways from what's normally available out there in the realms of meditation or even spiritual awakening. The difference is what I'm teaching is meant, the essential requirement is that it must be there for you under the most intense situations. Not just on your meditation mat, not just in your back room where you're comfortable and alone in a perfectly heated, nice music, musical atmosphere, or ocean noises, or anything like that. That's not what this needs to be. We're at a place on the planet right now where awakening needs to be embodied, not an abstraction, not a retreat, but a full-on, head-forward approach to life in this moment, even to the point of facing physical death. That's where we're going with this. And that's where the martial arts training turned out to have its connection. I didn't see this till years later.
Sure.
But when I began teaching, I would teach people that have studied in India for decades, yet they would fall apart under the smallest amount of pressure. They could be harmonious when things were ideal.
Yeah.
But when there was a pressure applied, the nervous system would revert to its default programming, which was aggression or defensiveness or victimization, tension, disharmony, noise, not to clarity.
Right.
And so we kind of have to put ourselves under pressure and find the clarity under pressure in order to move forward in everyday life. And that's when spiritual awakening is really about taking authority in your life. It's not just about, it's not an abstraction. It's not a religion. It's not even, I mean, spiritual is one of those words that it means different things to different people.
Sure.
I use it because, well, I mean, how do you find your audience, right? But really we're talking about is a fundamental depth of clarity. A transcendence of the mind.
Yeah,
you know,
I like that. You know,
the term Buddha comes from the word buddhi. Buddhi means transcending of the mind, transcending of logic.
I've often thought that, having an experience, it intuitively to me, it feels like an experience of like, so many people have like near-death experiences and things like that. And those end up becoming powerful catalysts for spiritual growth and transformation and even, sort of mystical experience.
Yes.
And it seems like that's sort of a rite of passage for a lot of, a lot of people is, okay, I've got to sort of face death. It's certainly been a part of your journey, right?
Yes.
And then come out the other side.
Yes. It's fundamental. We could say it's sort of the gate to Eden. The east gate of Eden is guarded by a cherubim and a flaming sword, they say in the Bible. Well, really, that's fear. That's all of the content of yourself. Yourself, who you are, is made up of fear. The self is designed to allow the body to survive in the world. And so it's a fear of death that creates the self. It's not that it's wrong. Not that the self is wrong. It's wrong when we believe it to be us. If we see it as a tool and we strip away all that's unnecessary from that tool, and there's a lot of unnecessary stuff. There's a few structures of the self that are helpful. The name, I need to call you Brendan and you need to call me Richard. Otherwise, how am I going to know who I'm talking to? How are you going to know who you're talking to, right?
It's a reference point,
So it's like, Brandon is a name. It's like an address code on your mailbox. Someone's got to be able to deliver the mail and you need that code. But it's not really you. Not really. And when we believe this, the first levels, we tend to believe it on a psychological level. I mean, even we would say, I am Richard Haight, I am a doctor, and we believe it to be, we're totally immersed in that story. But that's just the first level. We're immersed in that story at a nervous system level. It's ingrained in the body very deeply. So under pressure, the logic's going to go out the window, and the reality of your nervous system is what's going to show up. An awakening needs to go to the cellular level. It needs to go into the nervous system so that the reality or the clarity is available even under pressure.
And what do you recommend is, obviously, not everyone is necessarily going to pursue martial arts or, would you say the most powerful tool to prepare the nervous system as we level up, expand, ascend, whatever you want to call it, is meditation? Or, what would you say?
Well, what I would say, I'll answer this in two ways. The first one is the most powerful tool is a tool that addresses where you are right now. Whatever you need right now. And for some people, that may be a spiritual retreat. But that might be temporary. You just have to address where you're at
Starting
right
point.
now. Right. And so if you're just an utter mess, you can't even keep a simple regimen or discipline. You can't even get up on time. The very first step might just simply be getting your circadian clock in order so that your body is no longer rebelling against your intentions, your goals and aims. It might just be simply stop lying, follow through on your intentions and promise. It might be very, very simple things. And we need to go through those steps because if I say you need to join the dojo, but you can't even get up on time, it's not going to happen. If you can't get up on time, you're also not going to be able to meditate. You're not going to be able to do anything. So it's very, very individualistic. But the second answer would be for a person that has got the other aspects of their life in order, their circadian clock is on. They're able to make an intention and follow through on it. Right? They're able to make an intention and follow through on it. And they're also aware that their logic is not the only answer. There's a deeper voice within. For that individual, it might be meditation. I would urge them to meditate once they get meditation going, but meditate with your eyes open. Meditate in movement. Don't limit it to seated position, because that will never translate into your daily life. Never. Don't,
I like that.
In the martial arts, what you do is what you've practiced. And if you have not practiced the reality of your daily life in meditation, you won't be able to embody that. It won't work. What will happen is you will collapse into mind whenever you're doing anything, when your eyes are open. So if you're doing a traditional, the form of meditation I teach is very, very different than anything else that's available out there. For that reason, it was born of being in the world, having to have clarity, having to find that clarity while my teacher has got a sword in front of me.
Right.
And if I collapse into mind, I'm doomed. And the reason for that is thought is too slow. Thought is too slow.
Right.
If I see what he's doing and it has to travel through the logical mind and be calculated out, be understood before it translates into movement, I'm finished. And at the same time, if my movement is just habitual, all I have to do is feint to find out what my habitual movement is. Now he knows what I'm going to do. I'm finished. Both of those answers are dead ends. It's not about habits. It's not about mind. It's about clarity. And now if I can find that place of utter, clear, silent being, the right answer emerges on its own. I don't know how it happens. As soon as I try to figure out how it happens, I'm back in mind. So you don't explain it. If you try to explain the mystical, that which is beyond mind, you are in mind while trying to explain it. You're back in suffering. You're back in noise. This cannot be encapsulated by the mind. We have to open up to the reality that there's something deeper than the mind and the explanations. And then something can re-enter into that Eden. But the interesting thing is the statement, I don't know if you've read the Bible, I find this very fascinating. There's a cherubim and a flaming sword which guards the eastern gate of Eden. And so that no thing can enter in. So that nothing can enter in. No thing. Mind is a thing. It's an identity. It's thinking. Only clarity can enter in. One must be transparent. Transparent. And so the meditations that I teach are about finding transparency in your life, both in silence, with eyes closed, with eyes open, through action in the world, while making love, while doing anything. So that we can re-enter that metaphorical Eden, so to speak.
Right. And do you give in your book, what is the name of the book that is meditation? Is it Inspirance? Am I saying that right? Inspirance. The reason it's important. The reason I call it insperience, not experience, is because experience is something that is learned. It's knowledge. I see.
It's of the mind.
Gotcha.
What I'm talking about is not of the mind. It's not learned. You cannot understand it. It's transcendent to experience. And so the book is titled Inspirance. That probably throws a lot of people off.
I like that though. I like plays on words like that and switching it up, and especially in a way that makes so much sense. Is it now? Do you give actual techniques how to do these moving meditations? Yes. Can you give us a sample of that?
Yes. So in the Unbound Soul, which is by far the more popular of the two books, it gives the basic meditation as well as some other tools, essentially a lot of mindfulness type tools. They're truly actually mindless tools, but in modern terminology, we might classify it as mindful. It's about awareness. Inspirance is specific. So in the Unbound Soul, the meditation is one chapter. Inspirance, the entire book is about meditation, and it runs you through the whole path of awakening as it occurs through the meditative process. And so, for example, the way we would do the most fundamental meditation is with eyes closed. And we're going to just take almost all of the rules of meditation and toss them out the window. No, you don't have to sit with your spine perfectly straight. No, you don't have to sit. You don't have to lie down. You don't need to be in a darkened room. You don't have to have your eyes closed. You don't have to have music on. You can do this in a heavy metal concert.
Heavy metal meditation. I like it.
You can do this anywhere. And if you can't do it in a heavy metal concert, you're a white belt.
Metallica meditation.
If you cannot meditate under the most extreme, in a heavy metal concert, you're a white belt. Let's just cut through the bull. You're a white belt. I don't care how long you studied with which guru. If you cannot do that, because if the guru's worth his salt, he can meditate in a heavy metal concert.
Right.
And if you can't, then you're not there. It doesn't matter how many years or how many certificates you got. You're not there. First step is to be honest of where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so if we can be honest about, I'm not trying to be rude about this. I know there's a lot of people out there that are eager for something real, eager for something that's going to work for them. And they don't want to play with any more bull. They don't want to play with any more. They don't want to spend another 10 years sitting on a meditation mat, enjoying that time, or maybe even struggling, but not being able to take it into their relationships, into their work, into their daily life. And so this is for those people. I just be very straight. I'm not trying to, say the right words or make you feel good if what you're doing isn't working for you. If it is working for you, then great. If it's not, you're going to have to try something different. Mm-hmm. And so what we start with is opening the peripheral vision. Instead of focusing on anything, open up we're going to use the senses for this. This is about embodying through the physical body, and the senses are the windows of the human body. So we'll relax our vision, sit in a comfortable way. That's the only thing. Don't totally slouch over, though. You don't want to fall asleep. So just sit in a relaxed, comfortable manner. No position is necessary. No hand, formations are necessary. None of that. Just relax. Relax the jaw, relax the shoulders, relax the breathing. Open the peripheral vision. And we'll be in that, if it's all right with you, we can be in this open peripheral vision for about a minute before we move on to the next step. Is that all right?
Sure.
All right. So it's going to be a silent moment here of about a minute. I'm not sure how conducive that will be to the radio podcast.
Yeah, it's fine. They're going to be busy checking out their periphery.
All right. So we're just gracing the periphery. We're not going to let our eyes move around. We're not going to try to identify anything. Just take it all in. Now, if the mind does identify, that's all right. We're not going to fight it. Just notice that that's what it's doing. At some point, after some practice, the mind just stops doing it. The mind will continue to identify so long as we fight it or agree with it or struggle with it in any way. Instead, we just don't feed it. We allow while observing the totality. Be sure to relax. As far as willpower goes, this is almost so soft that it's like a prayer. We're not going to use a lot of willpower here. That won't work when someone's standing in front of you with a sword. You'll freeze up. So we just open the eyes, open the peripheral vision, and relax into the totality as much as possible. The next step is opening up awareness of sound, all sound from all around the body. Sound within the room, sound within the body, sound outside the room, all sound. If you don't hear any specific sounds, that's fine. We're just working with the function of hearing. Not the content of hearing, but the function, the ability to be attentive to sound. Now, in the event that there's a listener who maybe is blind and cannot see, that's not important. You just focus on what you can do. Use the senses that you can use. Because your brain and your nervous system will have adjusted and you'll get to the same place in the end. If the mind is trying to identify sounds or is perturbed by a certain sound, know that the issue is not the sound itself, but the attitude toward it. Say, for example, we hear the ticking of the clock and our mind sticks to that ticking. Not the clock that's wrong there. The attitude of judging or condemning the clock as being wrong is the issue. Instead, we allow that sound to enter in as part of the orchestra of all that is. Still softly aware of the total peripheral field. Softly aware of all sound. Relaxing the body still more. Next, notice the sense of smell and the feeling traveling through the nostrils and into the lungs. Enjoy that sense of smell, almost a wine tasting kind of experience. You might smell smells in the room, your own body odor. You might even smell things that you've eaten earlier in the day. No need to identify them. Allow it all to be part of the orchestra of all it is. Relaxing still further, still lightly aware of the peripheral field of vision and sound. We move on to the sense of taste and the feeling in the mouth. Relaxing still further, we move on to total bodily awareness, inner and outer dimensions. You might notice the feeling of gravity pulling on the body, the clothing on your skin, the air traveling over your skin, and so forth. Internally, we might notice certain aches and pains, points of discomfort. The trick is not to focus on any of those points, but instead allow awareness to grace the totality. There will still be the aches and pains, but they're sort of in the background of awareness. Notice the totality. Awareness comes through awareness of context, of totality. When we focus to exclusion, we lose context, and we get caught up in the disharmony of the mind. We find clarity when we notice the context, the totality. Some people may have a tendency to want to close their eyes so that they can concentrate further. I would encourage them to avoid doing that because the mind is what's trying to concentrate. This isn't about concentration. Now, it will take a little while for the brain to open up to these possibilities, but not that long. Surprisingly, it really doesn't take that long for a person who enjoys this process. If we go into this process of meditation with the idea of discipline or willpower, it'll become a fight. We'll eventually get a negative physical association with meditation. There'll be a hardness in our eyes and our face, something that later you will have to recover from, something that later you will have to be rehabilitated from. Instead, we go into this with a joyful attitude, a playful attitude, an innocent attitude. This is a meditation that children can do so easily. You can have a child up and running in meditation after just a few sessions. Sounds unbelievable, but it is just making use of the tools that are inherent to your body. It is your birthright. and it is what society has unconsciously hidden from you. We spend 90% of our visual awareness focusing, reading, thinking. The entire society is built on corners and edges, squares, disharmonious shapes. Nature is nothing like that. Spend enough time in nature, away from your camping gear, but living hand to mouth in nature. This awareness emerges naturally, especially if you're alone. If you're with others, you'll tend to talk. That'll keep you in the mind and you'll miss it. This is why vision quests are very powerful. Incidentally, this is also why psychedelics can be very powerful. They strip away the sense of the body, the sense of the mind, and suddenly we find a depth of being and reality which we could otherwise never imagine possible.
Right.
So this is the basic approach. Now, what my instructor and I discovered was actually much simpler than this.
Mm-hmm.
It's clarity, fundamentally, clarity. Awareness and clarity is what we're really talking about, not knowledge, not experience, insperience. And this is a way that I've formulated to give people a taste of it early on that they otherwise can't get. Right?
Love it. Definitely. I love the active element of, for someone who is who's a very active individual and lots of energy, like myself. I think it's a very helpful approach.
Yes.
To a moving meditation, if you will.
People with ADHD, they can't sit in one place and do something. Not saying that you have that, but this actually meditation works for them.
Right.
The normal type of any type of traditional meditation or previously exposed meditation, it's just a struggle, and they simply can't do it. This will work for anybody. And the trick is to get up and start moving as soon as you can while staying in that space of sensory experience, sensory awareness. And what will happen initially is you'll kind of, because there's a certain amount of effort involved, we're essentially asking the brain to do what it has been trained not to do for our entire lives. We do this very easily if we started out this way. It's because this is what the brain and nervous system is designed to do. But because it's been denatured through our lifestyles, it's actually going to be a challenge early on. And so what ends up happening is people walk stiffly and they kind of look like zombies. That's okay. As far as I'm concerned, all the visions of the zombie apocalypse, that's what that is. That's people awakening.
Right. Love it.
It's not brain. It's not other people's brain eating. It's our own brain eating. We're eating the mind.
Yes, delicious, delectable snack.
That's right. Eating the self.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, this has been absolutely amazing, Richard. I would like, as we kind of wind down here, I would like, one thing I love to hear from folks is, if you have a story of, and you've shared some good stories already, but any particular story of synchronicity or serendipity, or I suppose what you shared already would be positive paranormal, but anything along those lines that you care to share?
Oh, yes. So when I was young, before I went to Japan, well, it's still true to this day. I'm prone. There's some people that are just prone to have mystical experiences.
Right.
I don't think science really understands why, but science has determined that this does in fact happen, and that these are deeply enriching, deeply meaningful experiences. It's not a psychosis.
Absolutely.
Although a lot of people think that way. Scientists have determined that
typically the people who haven't had those experiences, right?
Yes, that's right. But when we have this experience, what we find is that they are realer than real, and that's how they feel. And people will often describe them that way because they're so rich with meaning. They have so much depth of meaning. Right. And so I was just prone to having these just naturally. I don't know why, but But that's not a virtue. It's just it is as it is, and it can actually be quite traumatic. And for me, it was.
Sure.
I wouldn't recommend this to people, and I don't even think it's necessary to awaken to have these experiences. Although it could be helpful, it could also be harmful. And the way it could be harmful is if we identify ourselves with these experiences as if we're somehow special, as if somehow anointed, or that kind of
spiritual
thing.
Narcissism, I like to call it.
Yes, spiritual narcissism. Now, I did that for a period of time. I went through that until I realized.
I think it's a rite of passage for most.
Well, it's just that the self wants to glom onto anything, and it's trying to be special. And then that will then be a trap. But so one day I'm maybe 22, 23 years old. I'm working as a technical support agent for this company, and it's a lot of phone work, and it could be quite stressful. And I would take long lunches and go to this wilderness area that was sort of nearby called Elvin Forest in Southern California. And they had a lot of hiking trails, and I would basically take my lunch with me and go on the hiking trail, eat, and kind of meditate while walking and that sort of thing. As usual, I do my hike. I come back, 10 minutes or so, 5 minutes before I've got to leave. Try to get into my car and find out that the door's locked and I don't have the key. I locked my keys in the car. I look inside through the window. There they are in the ignition. Oh, gosh. Nobody else at this park. Out of cell phone range. I don't even know if there were cell phones at that time. There's certainly no payphones anywhere nearby. Calling, AAA or a locksmith wasn't an option. And I've got to be leaving now or I'm going to be late for work. So the first thought is, I got to break the glass. That's a pretty poor return on investment. I had done that before, and it's just not a good answer. Now, fortunately, at this time, somebody else drove up. I'm thinking they may have a Jimmy. So they have it's like a Chevy or a Ford truck or something like that. So I approach this woman. She gets out with her walking stick, and I approach her and, do you have a Jimmy with you? I lock my keys in my car. She says no. And she's got her keys in her hands, and suddenly my eyes are drawn to the keys in her hand, and she locks her truck key. And I don't know how I know this. That truck key will open my car. Now, I was driving a Nissan Sentra, little Toyota, or a Nissan Sentra. It's one of those little cars. It's not the key for my Nissan Sentra looks nothing like the Ford truck key that she's got in her hands.
Sure,
nothing like it. So this knowledge. I know that key will open my car. Makes no sense whatsoever.
It just popped in your head, sort of thing.
It's just there. It's just a knowingness.
Yep.
Not even a thought.
Yep.
It's a knowingness.
Yep.
A clarity. And so I say, I lock my keys in my car. You don't have a Jimmy, but do you mind if I try to use your car keys to open my car? She's like, it's a Ford. It's never going to open a Nissan Sentra's door. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I just have the strong feeling that it's going to work. Do you mind if I use your keys for just a minute? Like, okay. She comes over to the car with me, stick it in the ignition, pop, thing opens up. Give her back the key. She's like, oh my gosh, it's a little miracle. That'd be something for me to enjoy while I ponder while I'm having my hike. And thank you. And so, I get in my car and I drive off, rushing to get through all the lights. And now the interesting thing is I got to work on time, miraculously. But I was being tormented by this experience because the question that was in my head was, how did I know that key would unlock the car? I mean, did the key tell me?
Right.
Did God whisper in my ear? What's happened? I keep having these mystical experiences. Am I special? What's going on here? Why couldn't this lady get that same information? Right. Right. And so now my ego is just chewing on this. And I've been, so much mental noise over this. And, who could blame me? I mean, it's just, you have an experience like that, the mind is going to chew it to pieces trying to figure it out. Because the mind wants to own and control everything. Trying to create a belief system that's going to encapsulate it so that I can repeat that experience on demand. I'm the master. That's what the ego wants.
Yeah.
So anyway, I get home that night. I tell my roommate. Now my roommate's he's a certifiable genius, and he's never had a mystical experience, and he only believes what his senses can tell him and what science tells him and all that. And mystical experiences are just hooey, hogwash, stupidity.
Yep.
Stupidity. And so I get home, I tell him this story, and now he's just laughing at me. He's just laughing. And then when I finish the story, he pulls out his keys from his pocket. He had a Dodge Ram, similar keys to like the Ford, big long keys, and he says, you mean to tell me that a key like this opened your Nissan Sentra door? And I said, well, yeah, sort of like that, but it was a Ford key. But your key will open it. But now my voice just like on its own, without many thought, your key will open it too, I says to him.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, where'd that voice come from? And he's like, he's like, I gotta see this. And so he goes with me out to the garage, pop his key in, and boop, the lock comes up. And he's like, what the bleep? He screams, what the bleep? And then I'm like, I don't know how I know this, but I just knew your key would unlock the door. And then suddenly I understood what had happened. I just knew it. Before I bought that used Nissan Sentra, somebody broke into it using some kind of a lock, breaker or whatever, they jammed something into it. Essentially, it has no teeth inside. Any key would have unlocked it. Any key would have unlocked it. But how did I know that I could have used somebody else's key? If I had been like my friend, Tim, who was very logical and was unaccessible to a different perception, it would never have occurred to him. In fact, if that knowledge had come into him, he would have just said, that's stupid, and still have been locked out of his car. How did I know? Right? And so at some point, it took years later before I realized this. It's not important to know. In fact, the attempt to know is of the mind and causes more disharmony and actually prevents further such experiences. It becomes a blockage. There's so much mental noise. Instead, just open up to the possibility, relax into it, be thankful when it occurs, and move forward in clarity.
I love it. Such a great lesson in all of that.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Wow. Well, this has been so amazing, Richard. And, for those who want to connect and follow your work, and I know you have some workshops and things that you do and ways that people can connect. Maybe you can tell people about that now.
Yes. In fact, I've just opened up a new program. It will be opening up next week, and it's called Total Embodiment Meditation. It's an on-demand course. And what it will do is it will take each person through the most basic elements of the meditation process. In this type of meditation, I just ran you through. Sure. And it'll point out, of course, it'll identify the structures of the mind that lead us to blockages. And there are so many structures of the mind that lead us to blockages and lack of clarity. And it will also direct our awareness towards the most fundamental element. It's not really a thing, but that clarity within. And so this course is going to teach a person, assuming they practice it, to start to take that clarity into their daily life, not just on the meditation mat, not just in a darkened room, not just when the nice music's on, not just when the situation is ideal, but in the havoc of life. And so I call the meditation, it's the warrior's meditation or the observation meditation. The warrior's meditation is a good description. Imagine you're out on that battlefield. And you're surrounded by opponents with swords intent on killing you. That novice swordsman is full of anxiety. He's trying to anticipate what he's going to do next, what the other people are going to do next, and his anxiety exhausts him and becomes his downfall. Right? Yeah. That's the mind. And then you got the expert warrior surrounded in the same situation. Now he's more relaxed, but he's still got some strategy in his mind. Yeah. At given time, that will exhaust him too. The skilled opponent will kill him. The master warrior, he's there. He's fully present, aware of all that's happening around him, but he's as relaxed as a cat resting in the peonies. And he allows the right action to occur on its own, of its own accord, and somehow he finds the way out of that situation. And that's what the meditation class will. It's unlike any other meditation course out there. 32 lessons. It's really, really powerful, and it can be found at positivehead.com/RH.
That's correct.
All right. So people who are interested in fully embodying meditation, you can find this at positivehead.com/RH, my initials, Richard Haight, and you'll be able to get this at a steep discount.
Excellent. That's wonderful that you're willing to do that. I know people will certainly appreciate it. I know I appreciate it. And yeah, so we'll put, guys, the link to the special discount. I'll just link it through the Positive Head site. And once again, that's positivehead.com/R as in Robert, or Richard in this case. R as in Richard, H as in Haight here. So definitely check that out if you feel called to do it. And very, very cool. I've so enjoyed this, Richard. This has been amazing.
Thank you, Brandon. I really enjoyed this conversation. Very, very helpful and insightful. And, for anybody who's interested, the first lesson there is about an hour and a half, and it's free access. But you can go there now and register your email, and they'll send you an email to let you know when it's available.
Excellent. Well, I do have one last question for you here. And that question is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Richard Haight?
Oh, this is another one of those tricky questions. Because the mind
Cliché and tricky.
The mind creates meaning. So now, when the mind is stripped away, there's a fundamental meaning that has no specific element. It has this undefinable. It is, for lack of a better term, this unconditioned love. But people don't really know what that is until they experience it. And even then, you'll never know it. It's an experience or insperience. It is meaningful by its nature, but it is not limited to any definition of meaning. The other element of meaning is what the mind creates. This is your job, your wife, your family, what you think gives you value and worth. Those are the meanings of life. And they are distinct to each individual. There is not one meaning to life, but there is meaning in life.
Well said. I like that answer a lot. Richard, thank you, my friend. You are such a joy. And I look forward to hopefully crossing paths in 3D at some point. And until then, journey well, my friend.
Blessings. Thank you, Brandon. Pleasure.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. Before we sign off, I wanted to let you all know that we have finally created the Game with the Universe on our website, where you can choose the first number that comes to your mind, and it'll pull up that episode number of the podcast. I've been saying this is a great way to co-create synchronicity and magic with your higher self for quite some time by doing this manually. But now, if you go to positivehead.com/YO universe, there is a super fun and simple interface to play this game with your higher self. I firmly believe just by setting the intention to play in this way, it opens up the door for magic, and it's a synchronistic way to hone in on nuggets of wisdom out of the huge catalog of episodes that are specifically appropriate for you at this time in your journey to becoming the next greatest and grandest version of yourself. And it also makes for a super fun way to engage and invite friends, family, people on social media to check out the podcast as well. So be sure to check out positivehead.com/YOUNIVERSE, and be sure to tell all your friends so they can play a game with the universe, which also helps the show to reach new people, which I greatly appreciate. And as a quick reminder, be sure to also check out positivehead.com/transformation if you're curious to learn more about Purium superfoods and why I take them every day. On this journey of becoming the next greatest and grandest version of ourselves that we have all embarked upon, I can't stress the importance of managing your physical vibration enough. And quite honestly, Purium has put together the simplest plan I've found to do so, and I'm sincerely excited to share it with all of you. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.